Hello everyone, Bag here, and welcome to Elation Trailblazer's complete guide and teammate tier list, where we will go through everything you would want to know about our next free unit. Timestamps are available for you to jump around with, and with that, let's get into things. EMC is a 5-ish star lightning Elation unit who acts as a budget Elation support for Elation carries. Most of EMC's kit is very simple. The basic does nothing special, while the skill is an AoE attack that generates 20 certified banger for EMC. This is a very basic skill that is mostly just useful in generating extra energy and in some resource generation that I'll talk about in a bit. But suffice to say, it's not that painful to basic on EMC when this is what you're missing out on. EMC's ultimate is the center of their kit, with it being a single target ally buff, generating 5 punchline while giving the target a cleanse, 10 certified banger, 54% crit damage, and 1 use of their Elation skill that works off of a fixed 20 punchline. This sounds very similar to Yao Guang's ult, but it should be noted that EMC's ult does not count as an AHA turn. This means it will not work with mechanics that rely on AHA turns specifically, nor does it generate 20 certified banger despite working off of a fixed 20 punchline. It also doesn't generate 1 punchline per Elation teammate like Yao Guang's ult does, meaning it's a bit worse for funneling something like Superwolf's ult charge. There's also a part where using this on a non-Elation unit gives them a 50% action advance, which I mean that might be useful to advance someone like Quoho to get her ult within a cycle or something, but in 99.9% of cases this is just kinda useless. EMC's Elation skill consists of 8 bounce attacks of Elation damage, before finishing with an Elation hit with damage that's split evenly amongst all enemies. EMC is one of those supports with quote-unquote tangible damage, with a lot of their kit revolving around it. So Exhibit A, their Elation skill is just a hit of damage, although we can jump ahead to their E4, which adds a 10% vulnerability debuff to all enemies to it. EMC's talent adds 10 energy and 3 punchline for each of their attacks. Keep in mind that this energy is fixed energy, meaning it's not affected by ER, so the actual gain here is a tad lower than what you might expect. Their ult cost of 160 is still a bit rough, but it's nice that they can get energy outside of their turn from natural or manual AHA turns. What's also interesting is that this 3 punchline per attack is incorporated into AHA's turn mid-turn. So say you're at 30 punchline on AHA's turn, Yao Guang goes first and then EMC, where EMC would then bring the punchline up to 33, and then any other Elation unit would work off of that 33 punchline. This does not work in Yao Guang's ult since it works off of a fixed, unmovable amount of punchline, but there it instead just generates 3 punchline for the next natural AHA turn. This talent also gives their skill an Elation scaling, with this scaling working off of the highest certified banger on the team. This means their skill's certified banger generation is completely pointless unless if they have the highest on the team, which to be fair because of their skills generation they will, outside of Evanescia teams where she steals and then hoards the team's certified banger. Moving on, their minor traces continue the trend of caring about EMC's damage, with the full trifecta of attack, crit rate, and crit damage. And while that attack would be useless for Elation damage, EMC's first trace is an Elation attack conversion, with a very low cap of needing 2200 attack for 60% Elation. This is very easy to hit even while missing main stats, especially since they are usually used alongside Huohuo, so I wouldn't really worry about min-maxing this too much. Their second trace gives 15 crit and 1 SP per ultimate, which somewhat but not entirely mimics Yao Guang's plus 1 SP per Elation skill. This 15 crit is also like Saber or Evanite, or Evanescia, in that it's invisible in the stat screen pre-combat, meaning for gearing, you should only be aiming to hit 85% crit rate. And their final trace gives an extra 2 certified banger to their skill after any ally unit uses their Elation skill, which, I mean, that's nice, I guess. We can also talk about their Eidolons in this kit rundown since they are free. E1 buffs the certified banger given to the ult target by 2 for every time EMC skills, stacking up to 3 times. Outside of saving SP for Sparksy, you're probably going to be skilling on EMC for most turns, so this is, again, just a passive nice extra bump. Their E2 adds a 12% Elation buff to their ultimate, their E4 we already talked about, and their E6 is an 100% crit damage buff to EMC, not an ally. Dang. Lastly, their technique is similar to Aventurines, with a small chance of giving the team 30% Elation for 3 turns at the start of combat, and a large chance of giving only 20% Elation instead. If you couldn't tell, most of EMC's kit is just a bunch of little things that adds up to be a decent, maybe a bit underwhelming supportive moveset. They can do a lot of Yao Guang's job in giving 1 free Elation skill per ult that works off of 20 punchline, just with worse buffing, a worse SP economy due to wanting to skill more often, a single target ult instead of a team-wide one, and worse damage contribution. For leveling priority, their ult level is the only thing that actually influences their buffing. Everything else is just for personal damage, where it's something that you should level, but you frankly aren't required to. I'll be honest in saying that there's really not much to how EMC works at a baseline. The team section will go over how they interact with specific kits, but their game plan of generating energy to then ult the carry is really not that complicated. One cool thing with EMC that also exists with Yao Guang is that you can buffer abilities in between EMC's ult and the resulting ally Elation skill. So say you want to buff Evanescia and give her some certified banger for her ultimate, but the Elation skill that comes afterwards would overcap her energy, which would then also waste the energy from her Fox follow-up attack. You can put Evanescia's ultimate before the Elation skill to solve this problem, with the trade-off of not receiving her Elation skill's certified banger for that sent out ultimate. Again, like with Yao Guang, there's also some decision making in how to maintain uptime of EMC's Elation skill debuff. Waiting until after an AHA turn or Yao Guang ult before you EMC ult, so that the sent out Elation skill is properly amped up, might be costly since so much of EMC's energy rotation relies on the large 15 energy from their Elation skill. That energy rotation is, of course, a bit wishy-washy, since Huohuo probably will be there to give energy through her ultimate or quid pro quo, and since Yao Guang's ult frequency or Elation shilling giving free AHA turns both also heavily influence their energy generation. For a baseline, with max ER, 2 skills, and 3 Elation skills, we're still a bit shy from a clean turn 2 ult without the help from, again, Huohuo or getting hit, as this is already assuming we get a Yao Guang ult every rotation for that third Elation skill. This is, however, assuming we are skilling every turn, which we again probably won't be doing in Sparksy teams, where there it's a question of will letting them skill be worth it if it leads to an extra EMC ult, which of course will be fight dependent. The big thing to keep in mind is the abnormally high energy from AHA turns, and besides that, it really is a simple ult when you can or wait until buffs are up situation, besides any other requirements from the buffed unit's kit, like Superwolf needing EMC's ultimate to either charge their ult form back up quickly, or to deal more damage when she's in her ult form, depending on what's needed more in that moment, or Evanescia wanting to Elation skill before ulting, if she wants to focus her ultimate's bounces on health bars that she cares about, alongside utilizing her first trace. Speaking of AHA turns though, with 4.2, we can now say a third Elation teammate contributes to AHA speed by giving a 20th of their speed, which is not a lot, but it will basically ensure that AHA will have over 133.4 speed, while being able to reach up to around 145-ish speed in a Yao Guang EMC Superwolf team, thanks to every Elation teammate being built for speed. So in that sense, again like Yao Guang, EMC helps make Elation flow more naturally simply by existing. So yeah, with how many times I've said it, they do just fill a very similar role to Yao Guang. And with how central Yao Guang is to current Elation teams, that's not a bad job at all to fulfill as a free unit. But it also means there's very little to say about them that hasn't already been said about Yao Guang, besides what was already detailed in their kit section. So let's move on to see what else there is to talk about with them. I'll plug you to subscribe. The next video up is a pull priority video for 4.2, followed by a guide plus teammate tier list for Evanescia. So if you'd like to see that, or this type of content for future units, then stick around. Okay, back into bed. Building EMC can be a bit weird. For main sets, if you have no one else using the main Elation support set, then just slap it on EMC. If someone like Yao Guang is already using it, then the main 2 sets I would recommend are Eagle or Sacerdos. Between them, there is no overall best set, as the strength of Eagle and Sacerdos can vary heavily depending on how many extra turns Eagle actually lets you get, and on how often you can ult to get up Sacerdos' rather poor uptime here, which then also depends on how fast the carry is that you're buffing. I would overall recommend Eagle, but if you can make Sacerdos work, then it can be a very strong option. I should also mention A, Hackerspace is a good option for Superwolf teams if you can play around this wonky one-turn buff, and B, you can build EMC for full damage with Magical Girl and Punk Lord, but this is generally not recommendable unless if you have an insanely optimized build and heavily invested into Yao Guang that could also help make their damage more relevant. For Planars, 2 of the 3 carries that EMC supports are hard to fully buff while having a planar with 5% ER. So for Sparksy main DPS, go Lushaka, but for the other 2, you can go Von Whack for a better fight start, or Keel for better buffing in exchange for losing the 5% ER. Lushaka can also work for Evanescia's non-Elation damage as a compromise here, but again, Keel is better for buffing, especially with her crit damage to Elation conversion. Keel also buffs the whole team, meaning you can buff both Sparksy and Superwolf when playing them together. For these 2, you can't really go wrong here. I would overall recommend Von Whack, but there really isn't a definitive best choice outside of, again, Lushaka for Sparksy main DPS. For stats, EMC is a semi-rare support that has no buffs that are directly tied to their stats, so the only things that matter are speed, crit for their personal damage, and effect res for Keel if you're using it. This means an ER rope, speed boots, a crit body, and an attack orb if you need it to reach his 2200 attack threshold. But that is a pretty low threshold, and they do get a very hefty amount of attack from their light cone. So if it's not needed, then just use whatever has better subsets. stats. EMC's damage is low enough to where just full-on going tank stats for sustainless runs isn't the end of the world either, but it's just tangible enough to where I wouldn't wholesale recommend this outside of runs where that extra tankiness is needed. So overall, it's once again similar to Yao Guang in that speed is the most important stat for faster ults and for making AHA faster, while crit is the secondary stat that you should gear for wherever you can. For Lycones, EMC has some pretty good free options. The Herda Store option gives some attack to EMC, as well as adding on a 24% elation buff to their ultimate, which is a pretty hefty amount all things considered. This Lycone is generally recommendable above the other free-to-play choice, as although both of them are strong in terms of raw amp, the Herda Store option has the advantage of better buff uptime due to being a buff on the carry instead of being a debuff on the enemy. Otherwise, you can go Yao Guang signature, I guess. For the rare cases where you are using Yao Guang elsewhere, and she doesn't need her Lycone where she's being used, sure, that's theoretically possible. Most of the time though, just stick to the Herda Store option, as it is pretty clearly made for them. Since we already covered their Eidolons, the last section is their teams. EMC's teams are rather set in stone through being a unit with a very narrow and well-defined niche. So let's bust out the old teammate tier list to see how things are looking. First off, for Sparksy main DPS, EMC acts as an alternative to either Yao Guang or Sparkle, and while then replacing Yao Guang is a rather self-explanatory workable downgrade, things are a bit more interesting with them trying to replace Sparkle. Remember that with EMC here, we activate Sparksy's second trace, giving 3 more thrill and 4 more punchline per ult, as well as making AHA comfortably faster without the awkwardness of running speed boots while using Sparkle. In exchange for losing Sparkle's SP generation and very superior buffing, we instead get more Elation skills, which is very nice since not only is Sparksy's Elation skill an incredibly large portion of her overall damage output, but it also generates 2 thrill, further letting her be more self-sufficient for her skill spamming. And as I talked about in my Sparksy guide, having low SP while burning through thrill means we can get the full 2 SP from the lucky procs, meaning thrill is inherently more valuable when we are not able to cap Sparksy's SP every turn. So if we get lucky and get extra SP from thrill that we wouldn't have gotten when using Sparkle, then that's also more skill uses that can supplement not having Sparkle's catered support. Now, I don't think EMC will be replacing Sparkle here, especially if she has any amount of vertical investment, as EMC's lackluster buffing and skill point consumption makes this synergy not a perfect fit. But at the very least, it is still nice to have the ability to free her up for other teams, as she is a very coveted support. I'm putting Sparksy to the S- tier, and with that, let's move on. For Super Wolf teams, EMC is in a rather similar position as a budget alternative to the 2 standard teammates that Super Wolf is designed around, Sparksy and Yao Guang. In replacing Yao Guang, EMC is able to perform much of the same utility to a very similar degree for specifically Super Wolf. EMC's ult only gives 3 less ult charge than Yao Guang's, due to it not being an AHA turn. Super Wolf basically requires an ult charge funneler in her teams to function, so EMC being perfectly serviceable in that role as a free option is great. The problem is that the vast majority of their buffing and utility is completely single target, which leaves Sparksy with a lot less to work with. Compared to Yao Guang, Sparksy gets less Elation skills, less thrill, less SP, less certified banger, and a lot less raw buffing. This is not the absolute end of the world, as at the end of the day, Super Wolf is the primary damage dealer here, and Sparksy can still do her job just fine of enabling her damage through proccing her mystery boxes. But it is still a glaring flaw that EMC has in replacing Yao Guang here. Of course, EMC can also replace Sparksy, creating a hypercarry Super Wolf team that doesn't really have any glaring mechanical flaws outside of course, losing Sparksy's damage contributions from herself and her mystery box proccing. This hypercarry Super Wolf team will perform better than a Yao Guang-less Sparksy team, but both cores are perfectly viable in their own right. Preferably though, investing in a Super Wolf team means replacing EMC with the pieces of her standard core. But as a budget backup to help the team work at a baseline, EMC does a completely fine job. And lastly, for Evanescia, this is the team that EMC was designed around, as their very fast certified banger production plays off of her conversion from certified banger to energy, which then feeds into her main game plan of working around her very expensive, very hard-hitting ultimates. EMC's skill gives 20 certified banger to himself. Evanescia steals 10 of that when the certified banger is gained, and takes another 5 when that other 10 is lost. The conversion from certified banger to energy is affected by ER, so if Evanescia has an ER rope and her signature, a single EMC skill would give a total of 21 energy, before we even consider the additional certified banger from her third trace. Now, Evanescia's Elation skill is not the center of her damage output, but it is still a nice chunk that then also generates energy and certified banger, which then also increases if you have her U1. When sized up against her gigantic 480 max energy, giving 20-ish energy per turn and 30-ish energy per ult might not seem too amazing, but it is notable that other energy funnelers are either either inefficient in their buffing for Elation damage, or they rely on giving fast turns to the carry, which is counterintuitive here, since that means burning through Evanesia's very important Certified Banger uptime. Having a third Elation teammate at all also helps with Evanesia's Certified Banger once, as this means another participant in Aha's turns, and therefore another recipient of its Certified Banger. This means for natural Aha turns, or Yaoguang Aha turns, you can expect to have around 44% more Certified Banger for Evanesia, which is not a bad increase since EMC also generates a semi-moderate amount of punchline, or just a bit more than Yaoguang. This is on top of the normal benefits from having 3 Elation teammates for Aha speed tuning, which we have already talked about. The last thing that I'll mention is that EMC's skills Elation damage scales off of the highest Certified Banger on the team, and Evanesia not only steals ally Certified Banger, but she will also just plainly have so much more Certified Banger than any other carry, meaning this is one way of making EMC's damage slightly more tangible. If I'm being honest, there isn't really much that makes EMC a fantastic, great teammate here over just being an Elation bot, which is to say, Evanesia wants Elation teammates who revolve around Elation mechanics, and EMC wins here since the unit who they are a worse copy of is also being used in this team. I'll go more in depth with Evanesia's teams in my eventual Evanesia video, but for our purposes today, she'll be at the top of the list. Speaking of that list, it's looking kinda empty. Yeah, EMC is only really remotely viable in these Elation teams, so they lose the universalness that RMC has that was part of what made them such a fantastic unit. But on a case-by-case basis, EMC is perfectly fine with every Elation carry. Not anything to get excited over, but as a stopgap filler option before they get replaced by future premium Elation supports, I think EMC does a perfectly reasonable job. And that's everything. Going to the channel member corner just to say that I appreciate every single one of you as always. And with that, expect my poll priority video in about a week, and until then, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!